The year is 2019. It's an age of groundbreaking technology, cultural diversity, and social and political tension. And if we could travel back in time about 100 years, we'd come to another time of major innovations and social changes. The 1920s. The 1920s are referred to by many nicknames, including the Jazz Age, the Age of Wonderful Nonsense, or most commonly, the Roaring Twenties. It was an exciting decade of economic prosperity, national hope, and many cultural changes. Americans began to live a lifestyle of leisure and consumption, meaning that they had more fun and bought more products. This increase in consumerism was due to new systems such as assembly lines and installment credit. The USA had been victorious in World War I a few years prior, which contributed to this national sense of optimism and joy. The 1920s are considered a very progressive era for education, during which a focus was put on student-centered learning. Due to the baby boom after World War I, there was a need for more teachers and larger school buildings. Because of this new focus on education, the number of high school graduates doubled in the 1920s. School was intended to educate students of all levels and help them reach their full potential in life, instead of just training them for a certain career. New classes were added, such as physical education, geography, and home economics. Schools also began to be more accommodating to students with disabilities, introducing special education classes and curriculums. The 1920s popularized new forms of entertainment such as movies, radios, and new music. Until the late 20s, most movies were silent, starring popular actors including Charlie Chaplin, Greta Garbo, and Gary Cooper. A movie ticket cost only 25 cents, and by the end of the decade, 90 million people went to the movies per week. Radios also became extremely widespread, providing entertaining programs and broadcasting news and advertisements. By 1929, 10 million houses had radios, and there were 800 different stations. Radios also popularized sports and gave some athletes a celebrity status. Along with the popularization of radios came new styles of music, particularly jazz. Jazz originated in New Orleans and spread throughout the country as jazz musicians began to move to major northern cities. This new music went along with a novel lifestyle based on having fun and rebelling against social norms. During the 1920s, women gained new rights and a new image. Many activist groups formed in order to gain these rights, which included the right to vote. Some women went to vote and filed lawsuits when their votes weren't accepted. After being rejected twice, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on August 18, 1920, and finally gave women the right to vote. Many women continued working the same jobs they occupied during World War I, when their husbands were away, and the number of working women increased by 25%. Today, women have many more rights in education, politics, and work. However, we're still working on total equality. Some women, known as flappers, completely broke the social norm. They wore their hair short, their dresses short, and their heels high, as well as more makeup than previously used. Embracing a lifestyle of independence and fun, flappers engaged themselves in activities that were often viewed as unladylike, such as smoking and drinking alcohol. I've grown up in an age of modern technology, such as computers, cell phones, and even artificial intelligence. This would have seemed almost miraculous 100 years ago. Living in the 1920s didn't involve such advanced technology, although there were major innovations during that time. Appliances such as washing machines, dryers, vacuum cleaners, irons, and dishwashers were invented, making housework much easier. Cars became more available and a popular source of travel, adventure, and freedom. There were also major medical breakthroughs such as insulin and penicillin. Other innovations of the 1920s include pop-up toasters,
jungle gyms, traffic lights, hair dryers, lie detectors, cotton swabs, cheeseburgers, masking tape, sunglasses, and bubblegum.
After serving as a lawyer, a mayor, a governor, and the vice president, Calvin Coolidge became the 30th president after former President Warren G. Harding died. Coolidge was known as being honest and quiet. As president, he cut taxes and reduced federal spending, which contributed to the prosperity of the decade. He also focused on increasing equality and acceptance for African and Native Americans. He signed into law the Indian Citizenship Act, which granted full citizenship to the indigenous people of the U.S. Many of the political issues today are very similar to those of the 1920s. Three that stand out are immigration, racism, and anti-Semitism. During the 1920s, many immigrants came to America from Europe. This new increased diversity in language, religion, and custom was unappealing and even frightening to many people. The Emergency Immigration Act of 1921 set numerical limits on immigration based on a new quota system. The National Origins Act of 1924 lowered the limit even further, allowing only 2% of a country's residents to immigrate per year. Today, the government still struggles with immigration policies. Just like during the 1920s, certain groups are viewed as threats to both American culture and the economy. As well as immigration issues, there was a wave of discrimination and persecution. The Ku Klux Klan re-emerged, targeting groups such as Jews, Catholics, immigrants, and African Americans. Many African Americans relocated from the rural South to urban northern and western areas in order to escape the racial discrimination they faced in the South. There were very few jobs available for African Americans, and segregation forced them to use different restrooms and attend different schools. Many Jews immigrated to America in the early 20th century, and they were also targeted during the 1920s. They were said to have too much influence over politics. Propaganda such as The International Jew by Henry Ford was published. There is still anti-Semitism and racism in America today. Hopefully in another 100 years, these issues will be completely resolved. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, marking the beginning of the Great Depression. After a decade of carefree consumerism, economic advancements, and a national sense of optimism, the economy was worse than ever. Millions of people lost their jobs. The unemployment rate was at 25%. More than a third of American banks failed, causing many people to lose their life savings. The Great Depression was partly caused by the Roaring Twenties, because of unrealistic stock prices and extremely high consumer spending, which often relied on credit. However, there is no disputing that the Roaring Twenties will always be a distinctive era of exciting cultural changes, economic growth, and national defiance of traditional moral standards.